All right, thank you all for joining tonight for our fish camp talk with the Nevada Department of Wildlife. We have streams, rivers, trouts in a desert climate with Travis Hawks out of the Western region, working a lot with the Truckee River and the area around there. Thank you so much, Travis, for presenting tonight and giving us some more info on trout. So if there are any questions, please let us know throughout. You can use the chat or the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Our audience is muted automatically with the video off, so you don't have to worry about that at all. And we definitely like questions. And since you're off screen, feel free to take notes, have a snack, and enjoy Travis's awesome presentation.
All right. Thanks, Abby. And like she said, my name is Travis Hawks. I'm the regional fisheries biologist, kind of in the northwest part of the state. So I mainly focus in the Tahoe Basin, Truckee River, and then everything north. So kind of Washoe County, a little bit of Humboldt County. And my job is basically making sure the wild fisheries we have are healthy, and also making sure that all of our stock fisheries are doing well. So I'm going to go through this presentation, talk about a handful of things, kind of relate them a little bit to drought. Since we are in a desert climate, we are in a fairly substantial drought. We just recently did have a pretty healthy storm system in the northern part of the state that has relieved a lot of the drought effects we've been seeing, but still in the drought. So things we're going to go over are going to be mountain streams, the fishable rivers, our Nevada trout species, what those trout species are eating, the flow conditions we typically see throughout the year, the behavior of the trout during those flow conditions or during drought situations, and then a few things to kind of keep an eye on when you're out fishing, specifically in kind of rivers and streams and any real flowing water. So I guess just going forward, the first one I wanted to talk about were mountain streams. They seem to be the least impacted in the kind of drought cycles we get. And then, I mean, really on any given year, even in the hot parts of the year, so July, August, September, when, you know, some of the lakes, ponds, things like that people like to fish get too hot. Mountain streams typically stay much cooler and can provide for year-round fishing. There's seasonal variation in what you're going to find in those streams. Number of different fish. We'll go over all the different trout species here shortly, but you can catch several different species of trout throughout the state of Nevada, both native and then stocked as well. Like I stated, the water temps in these mountain streams are typically a lot cooler than they would be lower down in the valley. I mean, common sense, there's a lot of shade, a lot of structure. You get a lot of gradient, or the streams are just steeper typically. So what you see there is, you know, as that water is tumbling down the stream, going over rocks, going over, falling down logs, things like that, you get oxygen being recharged into the system. So even if that water heats up a bit, it will have more oxygen. So that helps out those fish species that are, you know, trying to survive in the hot summer months or through the drought periods of the year. Typically our mountain streams for the most part are going to be cold water species, which again are going to be your trout species. So. And then talking about the Nevada, what we kind of consider the rivers in Nevada, there's a number of waters across the state that are called rivers, but we're going to focus on the three kind of up in this area. You've got the Carson River, and there's two forks of it, the East Fork and the West Fork. Anyone who's familiar with it, it basically flows through the Carson Valley, Gardnerville area. The two forks come together in the Gardnerville area, and then that river flows through Carson City and then eventually terminates or ends in the Lahontan drainage, basically Lahontan Reservoir, and then ultimately on good water years it ends up in Fallon. Then you've got the Walker River, and again you've got an East Fork and a West Fork. The Walker's a bit south from the Carson River. Again, starts in California, flows into Nevada. The East Fork and the West Fork come together in the Yerington area, and then that river terminates in Walker Lake. And then the last one is the Truckee River, which comes out of Lake Tahoe. The actual upper Truckee River starts above Lake Tahoe, flows into Lake Tahoe. And then you've got water comes out of Tahoe, flows through California into Reno, and eventually terminates in Pyramid Lake. One thing to keep in mind about all of our Nevada river systems and basically the lakes they terminate in is it's an entirely closed system, part of the Great Basin. So, you know, and most people realize this, but we have no water within Nevada that flows to the ocean at all. In the northern part, it all typically ends up in a basin and desiccates, dries out, evaporates. So the species we've got, and most of these species, actually all these species, can be found in rivers across the northern part of the state, some in the southern part of the state. A lot of them are stocked. A few of them are native species, but we'll go through each of them. So you've got rainbow trout. They're kind of everyone's, you know, everyone recognizes a rainbow trout. We stock a lot of them across the state every year. We put them into the community fisheries, the ponds. They go into wild fisheries. We put them into all three of the rivers we mentioned. And then there's wild ones as well. So not all the rainbow trout that are out on the landscape are going to be stocked. We also have a lot of wild reproducing populations. The next one's brown trout. Similar to rainbows, we have in the past stocked them kind of across the state. They don't get stocked as heavily as rainbows. They're kind of more habitat specific, but we do continue to stock them in some areas. But again, just like the rainbows, they've done really well on their own. They've taken off. They provide, you know, a non-native sport fishery in a lot of our waters. The Truckee River is kind of popular for the brown trout. They get pretty big there, but they also do well in a lot of mountain streams. So we've got them all over. Brook trout is another one. We do very limited stocking on brook trout, but they exist across the state. They're a pretty popular mountain stream fish that everyone likes to go after. They typically don't get very big, but they're usually prevalent in numbers, and they're fun to catch. They're really easy to catch, great for people who are just starting out. If you can target a stream or a river that has brook trout in it, you can typically have a pretty good day. Lahontan cutthroat is the native, or one of the native trout species to Nevada. We do stock it. Again, we're stocking it in the Truckee River, Lake Tahoe, a number of streams we've moved them into. But they do exist across kind of the northern part of the state, a little bit south into the southern region. But for the most part, you're going to find them in the northern part of the state. They really like small streams. They actually evolved in a lot of our small streams. They've kind of been knocked back by the brook trout in a lot of those places, but our agency and others are working to get a few LCT or Lahontan cutthroat trout back into those streams. And then you've got red band rainbow trout. They really only exist in a couple very remote streams in the northern parts of the state, but they're a rainbow trout, but they're kind of considered landlocked steelhead from a long time ago. They're native. We don't stock them. We just monitor them. You are able to fish for them in those handful of places they exist. Kind of the extreme northwest corner of the state, there's a stream up there that has them. And then the extreme northeast corner of the state, there's a stream up there that has them. They typically don't get very big, but again, they're like brook trout in those streams. They're very prevalent and fun to catch. Oopsies, that wasn't supposed to do that. Sorry. So then the other ones, I didn't include pictures of these ones. You've got tiger trout, which is a hybrid between a brown trout and a brook trout. We stock those mostly in still waters and in community ponds and things like that, but we do put them in a handful of stream fisheries across the state. And then you got bow cut, or a cut bow, which is another hybrid. It's a rainbow and a cutthroat cross. Again, we mostly do those in still waters, but you can find them in some moving water. Yellowstone cutthroat is a native fish that exists in the very northeast corner of the state. And then Bonneville cutthroat exists kind of along the eastern portion of the state, down to Ely, a little bit south of Ely. And then mountain whitefish, which a lot of people don't realize are actually a trout species, or salmonid. And they exist in a lot of our river systems. They're kind of an indicator of a healthy system. They're a very sensitive species. So if we're not seeing mountain whitefish fishing, or if we're doing surveys, things like that, we know there might be a greater problem we should look into. So then moving on to forage and what all these cold water trout are eating, and specifically in the fall and in a drought period. The main one's going to be there's always fall invertebrate hatches. So if you're fly fishing, you need to, if you're familiar with how to do some seining or netting of inverts to see what's out there, that's typically your best way to figure out what they're eating. But it can be a number of invertebrates. And I know, I believe Jan is going to talk more about the typical flies you want to use for that type of stuff. But then also crayfish is a big one in these river systems. We have a lot of introduced non-native crayfish that exist, and they exist in high densities. And a lot of these fish, as they get bigger, they start to key in more on the crayfish. So as they mature, they realize that those crayfish are, basically like a protein snack for them. There's a lot of nourishment, so they'll start figuring out how to feed on crayfish. So that's a really good one. And then you've got native forage fish. So things like a lot of people refer to them as minnows, things like that. Like some ones that are pretty prevalent across the state are going to be things like red side shiners or speckled dace. Piute sculpin is another one. And again, when we see these drought conditions or like just low flow in general, so what you would see on a typical fall year in a river, as that water recedes, what happens is you've got all these bigger, more predatory fish that are being kind of forced into the same area with all the forage. So the crayfish, all the little fish that were able to avoid the big fish throughout the year because there's plenty of water, plenty of places to hide, they're now all forced into these smaller areas. So when it's like that, it's a good time to utilize things that are going to imitate these crayfish or those native forage fish. And then the last thing is egg foraging. So everyone knows what a salmon egg is, and it's basically it's exactly what it's called. But there's fake eggs out there for like fly fishing guys. There's things called egg patterns. And really, so fall spawning species are going to be brown trout and mountain whitefish and brook trout. And so when that's occurring, other species, even others of the same species, will start to key in on those eggs that are tumbling down the system. Because as fish lay eggs, they're not all just going to stay in one spot. Flow obviously moves them down the system. And again, it's really full of nutrition for those fish. Pretty easy for them to feed on. Those eggs just kind of bounce down the system, and fish will get in feeding lanes and spots where those eggs just kind of naturally flow to, and they'll gorge on them. So another really good technique is to utilize egg patterns through the fall. So that's a mayfly. Talked about the fall invertebrate hatches. That's a adult one, or it's no longer a nymph. And then you've got a stonefly nymph there. Sorry, I got a thing on my screen. Okay, stonefly nymph there. Crayfish, like we had talked about. And then that's a Piute sculpin. They're a pretty cool looking fish. They're obviously very small. Brown trout, rainbow trout love them. If you're fishing those river systems where, a little higher up in elevation, they exist in mountain streams as well, on the east and west part of the state. So anything that imitates that can work. And then you've got your native forage fish. So that's a speckled dace. And speckled dace are kind of imitated by, depending on your style of fishing, spinners imitate forage fish. You can use streamer flies, imitates forage fish. And there's dozens and dozens of things out there that are made to look like those guys. And then the egg hatch, we had egg foraging we talked about. And so those are some partially developed eggs, but salmon eggs, anything that looks like that. And there's, again, thousands of them out there. So flow conditions are a big one. So you get like this year, specifically Truckee River, all of our rivers up here were in rough shape towards the end of the summer. Bad winter led to little to no water coming down the systems. And so you get lower flow rates, and they're drought related or seasonal. This year it was both. But regardless, all years you're going to see a reduction in flow in the fall. So, what does that mean for the fishery in a drought? You get lower flow rates, you're going to congregate those fish into much smaller habitats during the warm months. Cold water fish, trout specifically, are fairly sensitive. They need oxygenated water. Warmer water has less oxygen in it. So if you can find areas where there may be a little like a spring coming in, or where a stream meets the river channel, you're typically in a drought going to find a lot of fish in those areas. The drought definitely increases stress on the individuals and the population. It's a cumulative effect. We may, like this year, we lost a few fish in the Truckee River system. It's not unheard of, and it happens kind of on a routine basis. But when it becomes a population level event, when we start to lose whole stretches of the river, that becomes a major concern for us and for anglers. This year, I think we were able to avoid that for the most part. And then the last thing in a drought is angling just becomes difficult in general. Those fish are so stressed, they're typically not doing a lot of moving. They can't afford to exert a lot of energy doing that. So what you'll see is like this picture on the top right. I took that picture late this summer when flows were kind of bottomed out. And what that is there's a spring upstream of that. This is the main stem of the Truckee River. There's a spring just upstream of that. And you've got something you're typically not going to see. You've got a bunch of large fish. The largest fish in that picture are going to be 20, 24 inches, right in line with a bunch of small fish. And that's basically because that right there is thermal refugia, the only place where the water temperature was suitable for them all and where they're able to eat. But those fish aren't doing really any active feeding from there. They're not swimming out into the edges and trying to grab any fish swimming around. They're basically just in survival mode at that point. So that's kind of, worst case scenario in a drought. In the fall, you just typically, on a normal year, flows will come down, but you get cooler temps, which will result in more feeding activity. As those temps remain cool throughout the day, fish are more active all day long. Optimal temp for trout species for feeding and kind of for their life cycle is 48 to 58 degrees. So, typically in the fall, you're going to see that, depending on where you're at, for most of the fall season, which, you can comfortably fish all day long and not have any concern that you're causing any negative effects to the fish. And you're also going to have a good time just because fish are more active. One good thing to keep in mind is if you can carry a thermometer with you year round, but you can carry a thermometer with you, it's a quick way to determine what the temperature is. And most temperatures are safe to fish at. We kind of put it at 68 degrees. Is if water temps are peaking above 68 degrees, you might want to try to find somewhere else for trout. One, it's really hard on the fish when you catch them when it's warmer than that. But two, you're going to have a better day if you go somewhere where temps are a little bit cooler, or just try fishing earlier in the day, things like that. Just help you out, have a better time. So those are that. And then, so the behavior, kind of specifically relating to the warm months. So as spring subsides and the water temperature starts to warm up in the summer, like we talked about, trout are going to become quite a bit less active. They're going to move into some deeper pools. They're going to hang out in the areas where there's more oxygen. So, again, deep pools. And then if you think like big riffle run sections, you'll find them in kind of the tail out or the end of those areas where all that oxygenated water is coming down the system and they're not having to struggle to breathe, things like that. But then you move into the fall, and as those temps are cooling off, those fish that have spent all summer, just getting by, they're going to move back into some of the more shallow water. They're going to increase their feeding activity. As they move into that shallow water, those forage fish, those crayfish, a lot of the invertebrates, they're more readily available in those areas. So the fish typically will start kind of gorging themselves almost as fall starts to approach. And then specifically talking about those fall spawning species, so the browns, the whitefish, and then even the brook trout, they're going to move kind of to the tail out of pools, kind of in that like flat water. You'll notice at the end of a pool, or like calm like run sections that's less than 2 feet deep. And what they're doing is they're scoping out areas to lay their eggs. So they need they need good flowing water through the areas where they lay their eggs. They want a lot of oxygen. It needs to be cool. And flow can't be so strong that it's going to blow their eggs down the system, but they need enough of it to flow over their eggs to keep them clean. When they're pre-spawn, they become pretty aggressive. So a lot of people like to fish for them that time of the year. Throw bigger lures or bigger flies. Those fish are they get, the browns specifically will get somewhat territorial that time of the year. And then as they start to get into active spawning, they'll be building their redds or their nests where they actually lay the eggs. This is when they become super sensitive. So fishing for the browns, whitefish as well, they're fall spawners, and then brooks, when they're actively spawning it's pretty easy to do. So it's something to keep in mind is if you're fishing towards a wild fish that's trying to spawn, you're going to have an impact on that fish's ability to procreate and the less fish for the following year. So yeah, it's just one thing to keep in mind. Fishing for them before they're spawning is awesome. And then again, fishing for them afterwards, just when they're actively on a red, and we'll talk about that, and I think in the next slide, is something you kind of want to avoid. But while browns are actively spawning, while whitefish are actively spawning, other species are going to be readily available. The rainbows, you can find, I have found in surveys and fishing, I've found rainbows that are basically camped out immediately downstream of where browns have their nests, because they're just sitting there feeding on the buffet of eggs that are coming down the system. So that's a good time to throw on one of those egg patterns and drift it down and try to catch those rainbows. It can be really fun and really effective. So then, yeah, like we talked about, so what to avoid. So active reds are what you want to avoid. There's nothing wrong with fishing for browns in the fall, but you just want to avoid those active areas. So what you're looking for, I've got several pictures here, is just basically lighter colored gravel. So if you're looking across a river and you can see the bottom, and it's, most rivers have that kind of darker color, a little bit of vegetation growth on the bottom. If you're looking across and you see an area that's lighter colored and circular, maybe 3 feet across, and it sticks out. Once you see one, you know what you're looking at forever. But those are the areas where those fish are laying their eggs. And what they do is they swim above it, and they actually swim sideways and use their tail to clean all that gravel off, to get all that vegetation, all that mold, everything that's growing on it. They clean it off so they can lay their eggs, and their eggs aren't going to build that bacteria, the fungus, all that stuff, and their eggs will be able to survive. So it's helpful for an angler to know, if there's a cleaned off area, there's most likely eggs in that area or browns really close to it actively spawning. A lot of the time you can see those fish plain as day when they're out doing that, because they do it in that, less than 2 feet of water, fairly visible. You'll see them when they're cleaning the reds. It's called flashing. And you'll see just a fish all of a sudden swimming sideways. And if you wonder what's going on, that's 9 times out of 10 what they're doing. Avoiding these areas just has long-term benefit for the wild fisheries, because we do have some pretty healthy and productive wild fisheries in the state. And by allowing those fish to continue reproducing, it benefits all the anglers, benefits the system, and just kind of a good thing to keep in mind. So this is a video of our survey we did in 2020 on the Truckee River. I think it's fairly short, if I can figure out how to play it. And this, what it shows is us doing an electrofishing survey on the main stem of the Truckee River. There's going to be some cool video of some larger fish. Seeing, yeah, so.
You'll probably have to add sound too. It's on the up screen. Sorry.
And then, so that's just a quick video. Those were all wild fish you were seeing there. That section that we surveyed, there's actually a very, very popular fishing area on the Truckee River. And you can see how many big, healthy fish are still existing in that area. So then, yeah, coming up after me is Jan with his favorite fall spots and flies that you would use that time of the year. And that is everything that I have for my portion of the presentation.
Are there any questions? Any specifics about any of the fish or sections? Travis fishes a lot too, so don't hesitate to ask fishing questions too.
Yeah.
All right, no questions yet, but definitely kudos for an awesome presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Travis.
Oh, we have one. Where is the part on the Truckee River you showed in the video?
It's the upper river. So if you're familiar with the Verdi Dam section or Quillisea Road, it's the section right off the Quillisea Ranch Road area where there's a couple access points up there.
And then I know this angler uses a lot of flies. Would a snow cone be good there?
That's Jan's department. But yeah, it would for sure. Yeah. And then, yeah, anything, if I was fishing that area, I would be, especially this time of the year, utilizing any fly that's imitating a Paiute sculpin up there.
Some more of the tan colors.
Tan and kind of a darker olive color as well.
Awesome.
I'm taking notes on this too.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you so much. If we don't have any questions or other questions, or if you think of questions later, don't hesitate to email us. Any of us, all our emails are on the website, and if they're not on there yet, they'll be on the new website soon. So, yep, lots of kudos for great presentations. So thank you so much. And then, yeah, Jan's on here ready to go with the fly tying, as we can see. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a very good night.
Thank you.